And we are back with Father Nathan Monk talking about his new book, The Miracle. You mentioned on social media that you thought your editor would look at the manuscript and essentially say, nope, not this time, but that's not happened. What was that conversation like?
So it was really interesting because especially how fast the book came together. I really thought I was going to just be told, this is just brain garbage, right? And it has zero value. It was kind of hard to feel very confident about the book because it came about, so fast. And unlike my other two works where I had this time to really work with it and tailor it and make sure that I had made sure every single word fit exactly where I wanted to, this just, because of the way that it flowed, I really did think it was going to be one of those situations where, editor would look at it and go, this is garbage and it deserves to be put in the trash. And every step of the way, as people started reading it, I was getting this very opposite reaction. People would come back. I mean, people that don't even cry would come back just being like, I cried, so many times in this book. It hit me on so many different levels. And I just wasn't expecting that type of reaction to something that came so quickly.
Now, we've built this up a lot. So tell us the story of the book, and why was the story itself so important to write?
So the premise of the book is it's about a guy named Patrick Thackeray, and he is a third-generation faith healer. And his family has had this church in their family for 3 generations. His grandfather used to be a tent revivalist and travel all over the country doing these tent revivals and faith healing sessions. And then his father attempted to turn it into a mega church, and his father dies earlier in life than would be expected. And so Patrick and his wife have to abandon their dreams of going into the medical profession and becoming a teacher to go and pastor this church that he never wanted to be in charge of. And so, I think that's a story that a lot of us can, even if, the characters themselves and their actual lived experience isn't exactly like ours. We've all had moments like that where we thought we were going to be heading in one direction and get pulled in another. And so what ends up happening for Patrick is he really doesn't have the same faith and zeal that his parents did until his wife is given a terminal diagnosis for a brain tumor. And all of a sudden, he has to come to terms with whether or not he believes God could actually perform a miracle in her life.
It's funny how people often find God the moment their bus is going over a cliff.
Right. And it was one of those moments. And they believe that she is healed. And all of a sudden, his life turns upside down. Even though he doesn't have a tremendous amount of faith, all of a sudden, overnight, his congregation goes from being a small church of, a couple of hundred to thousands of people traveling all over the world trying to be healed by him. And ultimately, it turns out that his wife's diagnosis was a false diagnosis. And he has to come to terms with the fact of what it really means to receive healing, what it means to have grace, and what a miracle would really look like. And I think a lot of times, like you were just saying, we wait until the bus is going over the cliff. A lot of times we kind of write the check that we want God to sign off on, right? We say, hey, listen, this horrible thing is happening in my life, and I want you to fix it. And here's exactly the way that I want you to fix it. And this is the thing that I want you to do. Could you please sign off? And I remember hearing this wonderful story about, there was a true story about a family. Their kid had gotten hit in a car accident. They died. They give all of their organs away. 6 other people live as a result of this. Mm-hmm. Whose prayer did God answer?
No.
And so, it was one of those scenarios where I wanted to kind of tell a story of, we have an idea of how we think that things need to go. But we also have all these opportunities where we could actually create the solutions without having to sit around and wait for
Divine intervention.
for some divine intervention. And I know you're a very philanthropic person. Both you and your wife are in your personal life, and there's those things that we do when we give of our time, our resources, our talents. That is miraculous in and of itself, without us having to relay any other sort of divine intention. And so that's kind of some of the subjects that this book really delves into. Is this guy who's grown up in this world of faith healing having to look at his life and everything that he knew come falling apart, and what that means to rebuild it.
Would you, so I guess you could kind of describe it as a faith-based book, but I don't know if you'd call it a Christian book, but it is basically a kind of a faith-based book, I would assume, yeah?
Sure. To me, the whole narrative is about looking at what it means to have faith, what it means to be a believer, what it means to trust, what it means to have grace, from a totally modern perspective. For so often, we look backwards for the answers, right? We look back 2,000 years, 3,000 years to find the answers. And this to me was sort of a modern fable of what would it be like if we interacted in a divine way now? What would it be like if we met some of these same characters that we read about in sacred scripture, but we met them now? What would they look like? What would they be like? Would they, if we met St. Peter today, I doubt he would look like the statues and the icons that we've seen. And so writing these characters in flawed ways and imperfect ways and modern ways was a very unique experience for me.
And because it's in novel form, I presume it's not preachy, which I think people are much more receptive to the message when it's a story and it's not something somebody is saying, you must believe this in this way. It's a
Absolutely.
novel. It's for you to accept or not to accept, or to learn from or not learn from.
Well, and the thing is, what I love about, kind of like I alluded to before with the novel, is it isn't a theology. Nothing about this is trying to dissuade someone in one direction or another. It's a story. It's a story for people to like or dislike, to enjoy or not enjoy, to cry over or use as toilet paper. It is just something that tells a story about a guy and his experience of what it means to watch his life kind of fall apart, and then slowly what it means to put that back together.
Nathan, we're going to go to another commercial break. Then when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the homeless shelter things you do and how the virus has affected that. We'll be right back after these messages with Father Nathan Monk.